Yeah, let's do it. And if you're new to us, what we like to do is recap every episode of Critical Role so you can kind of have a little bit of a refresher before we dive in deep to our theory crafting. Um, so we cut that out, host that separately on YouTube. So you might find yourself on that recap video right now, which thanks for checking us out. But if you're interested in hearing our full podcast for all that juicy theory crafting, etc., we will link it down below in the description box, the link to the full episode. Um, yeah, I feel like I've forgot something, but that's normal. It's just been a minute.
It's
So
been a
yeah,
while.
without
It's
further
been a
ado, I guess
while.
we'll dive into this recap. Which
Yeah.
you down to take the first half?
Yeah. All of a sudden I was like, wait, are you doing it or am I doing it? Tickets or the sandwiches? Yeah. So talking about this episode of Critical Role, there was so much content. It's a 4-hour episode, and yet it's going to be tough to pack it all into this recap. So
Mm-hmm.
basically the episode opens up with I'm just going to go and call it FCG's arch nemesis, our little bird friend
That's
who
fine.
had swooped down in the previous episode. And we begin this episode with this scraggly frilly bird that is basically attacking Sam's character, and it does in fact attack it, like splashes some kind of yellowish or green liquid on him. Can't really quite remember. And he takes a little bit of I think he took 1 point of poison damage. So
Yeah.
a bit of an irony here is that this is absolutely a nuisance and not necessarily, it seems, a formidable foe. Chaos kind of erupts as everyone's like, let's attack it. Ladna does ice knife on it, which is actually what's going to be what ends up causing it to go unconscious. We know that also Imogen's going to cast I think a level 3, maybe even higher, inflict wounds on it. And with her dice, she rolled with a 4D, I think a 4D6 or a 4D10. She does, no, a 3D6 or 3D10. She does 4 points of damage, like pretty much the bare minimum that she could have done. We get Orum's seedling weapon, which he improved on or really necessarily acquired in a couple of previous episodes, where he does the I think called grasping vines.
Yeah.
Very cool flavor where he like shoots these vines out to restrain this bird, and unfortunately misses as well. And once Ladna does the ice knife and the bird tumbles and goes unconscious or maybe dies, we don't really know. We know that Chetney jumps on it to sort of keep it held prone. We know FCG does spare the dying in typical FCG fashion. And I think it was either Orum, no, it was Chetney, I think, who does, I can't think of what the spell is, but detecting if it's fiend, foe, or undead, or fiend, undead, or fae.
Yeah.
And we find out it is undead. The bird seemingly comes back from the dead, or at least comes back from unconsciousness, seeming to regenerate. And FCG does speak with animals, and it's kind of like, what's going on, man? What do you want? And this creature doesn't really seem to have any purpose other than to make FCG's life miserable. It doesn't really give us much information. And in fact, we're not even sure if it itself really knows why it seems driven to do this, but basically says, I saw you and I just felt like, bothering you as much as possible. um, After this, the bird breaks free and manages to fly away, not before Laudna casts Hex on it and also sends Pate to chase after it. Pate, who sort of swoopingly flies after it, wanting to make a new friend. But unfortunately, this bird is a bit too fast. So the bird escapes. They're all kind of like, what the heck was that all about? And it's also this moment that they realize that Ashton is missing. He's no longer there. They even joke that maybe Ashton was kidnapped by the bird. In real life, though, Taliesin Jaffe was not feeling well, couldn't be there at the session. And Imogen even does, I think, sending to Ashton, where Ashton basically responds and says, hey, I had to go take care of something. I'll be back soon. So he's unfortunately not in this episode today. Anywho, they're basically asking FGG, like, what is going on? And he's like, I don't know. Like, as my whole life this creature has been after me, and it's a bit hazy. Even the information he's giving, it's not clear if when he says his whole life. I think Orm even asks, like, do you mean like pre-calamity your whole life, or do you
Yeah.
mean just recently? And he's like, I don't know. But all that to say, they're kind of like, well, that was weird. Actually, they do make a joke on, should we track it? Should we follow it? And then I think, oh man, what's it? Travis is like, so this is what we're doing today. Like this is our session today. Is we're chasing after this bird, and they're like, okay, let's get back to the main reason why we're in Eos. And if you remember, they are there to find Ebenold Kai and Professor Sumal, I think was their names. And they're at the seminary. So they make their way to the seminary in the Dominion Ring, and they basically go to this front desk clerk named Carol, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Is that right? And basically asking Carol a bunch of questions like, hey, where's Ebenold Kai? And they're like, oh, well, Ebenold Kai actually has canceled his classes for the semester. And no one's seen him in weeks. In fact, there is some frustrated academics and administration type people who are annoyed that his classes are canceled. We don't know where he is. And then they ask about Professor Sumal. And they're like, oh, he'll be here tomorrow, or she'll be here tomorrow. I can't remember which it is. He'll be here tomorrow, basically at noon. So they start to ask him more questions, and there's a couple of persuasion checks, maybe even like a deception check. I think Fern even actually says like, "Oh, are you guys looking for a new professor?" And Carol's like, "Well, yes. Do you know anyone?" And Fern's in typical chaotic Fern fashions, like, "Yes, actually, I could be a great professor. I know lots of things." Like, well, we're gonna need a little bit more than that, like some stuff you've published, basic stuff. It's around this time that Oram, with his 29 in perception, feels this unsettling presence, and the room kind of grows silent as this large figure enters the lobby of the seminary. This 7-foot tall, brutish, hulking, scraggly red hair, and an eyeless mask covered in some sort of script or scrawl covered over their face. This figure walks in the room, and Carol basically informs them that this is a judicator, which is one of the basically elite. They're called bodyguards. They're called boogeymen. They're called sort of like I can't even think, like houndsmen, bloodhounds, excuse me, who work for the highest echelons of Vasselheim, and that they are in Eos looking for something. They've been here for a couple of weeks, and everyone basically hates that they're there. They're very unsettling. Don't seem to speak. In fact, Jenny even goes up to this character and is like, "Hey, what's up?" This character says nothing, just looks at him, looks at the entire group, and then leaves. The party sort of surmises that maybe they're here looking for the stolen texts that were taken from Vasselheim. It's around this point that Carol's becoming very suspicious of this group. It's kind of like, I don't really know you guys at all. You're asking a lot of questions, and even asks like, are the adjudicators here for you? They basically ask for Ebenold Kai's address, and she's like, "No, I don't even know you." And not only is like put off by them, but you could tell is sort of thinking like, there's something really suspicious about you guys actually, because of how forward you're being. And it's in this moment that FCG cast Fast Friends on Carol and successfully makes her a best friend for 1 hour. And Carol immediately changes her temperament and is like, of course, how can I say no to you guys? And is like, well, why don't I show you where Ebenold Kai lives? And they're like, okay. And there's a bit of a funny debate on like, what do we do in an hour? Because she's going to know that we were basically charmed her, so to speak.
Right.
And there's some joking around like, should we kill her? Like, should we, how do we get rid of her? And Matt just does this great, like indulging thing of, she has to like take her vitamins and get like her jacket and all this like stuff. It's silly. But, basically they make small talk with Carol, find out about some side hustle stuff that she's doing, just friendly stuff. And then eventually she takes them to Ebenold Kai's place. And it's at this place that they basically decide it's Ebenold Kai's house behind this gate, and it seems sealed from the inside. And
Uh-oh.
Gale down through the chimney while everyone else kind of meanders and looks as normal as they can, even pretending that they're gardeners as two sentries walk by. Chetney makes his way inside and immediately smells sweat off someone nervous. Looks around, can't find anyone. Finally brings in the rest of the party. They're looking everywhere for this character, even like announcing, like, Emerald Kai, we're looking for you. Basically, eventually find, and this place is even trapped from the inside in like a very Esteros kind of way. They eventually find a secret passage down to a basement where two characters, Ebonald Kai and then an elvish woman, are reading from a scroll. They even throw a skull out uh, to basically blind Orem and Chetney, and even are successful in frightening Orem. And then they open a portal where they escape, and the party very quickly rushes in to this portal. And while screaming, pulling the screaming Orem over the skull. Goodness gracious, that was a long half of the recap. We take our break, and then we'll basically nothing else happened that episode,
Yep,
right?
that was it. No,
When
good job.
the adjudicator thing happened, I was like, yeah, Will said there was a lot in here. I guess that's what he meant. And then this second half is pretty crazy. So anyway, go ahead, man.
So yeah, there's a bunch of lore in this second half. I'm gonna try to get it through it efficiently. And also, really quick, I think something happened with my internet for like 3 seconds, so there might have been like a cutout very briefly there. So apologies. I'll have to go back
Okay.
and check after we're done. But apologies if that happened, y'all. It shouldn't have been long if it did. Anyway, so we pick back up with the party basically slipping into this teleportation magic in like just enough time for them all to get through. And they now find themselves in this dark cavern filled with like this hot sulfurous air, and there's even like a lava stream with molten rock kind of like trickling by them as well. The two people they were chasing, Evan Old Kai and this woman, are about 20 feet away, and the woman is actually loading a crossbow. Orum's like, hey, wait, we're here from Ro Istani. We have a
Right.
letter. We're seeking the help of the Grim Verity. And so Ebenol Kai is like, okay, wait a second, and takes the letter and actually reads it, and then tells the woman to lower the crossbow. He apologizes and it's like, hey, we were expecting more aggressive visitors, so all our apologies. And Imogen's like, oh, are you talking about the Judicators? Like, what's up with that? And Ebenold's like, yeah, presumably they're looking for us, myself and Baron here. And so everyone kind of introduces themselves. They're like, we're Bell's Hells, and they're actually uh, introduce Fern as their leader. And then Ebenold is Ebenold, and the woman is Dr. Baron Vesticio. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that correctly. And
Yeah.
she is a doctor of Exandrian history, specifically the time around the founding and the schism. She says that she and a couple of her colleagues basically found some stuff that put them in the crosshairs of powerful and dangerous people in Vasselheim, i.e., the Judicators are after them. So Orm's like, where are we, by the way? And they're like, oh, we're in, the abode of one of our allies, and points to a third figure that's actually there. This female tiefling in her late 50s, deep ruby red skin, white blue eyes, horns, short black hair. And she's actually like holding a wand in their direction, saying that, like, yeah, the only reason you're not like dead is because you seem to be, potential allies here. So she says this is, one of the places of my research, and introduces herself as Rin, Plane Rider Rin, in fact, and asks, like, why are y'all here? And FCG says, we were looking for Ebenold because of Spooky Moon stuff and all these things we've been learning. We were basically following the trail of the Loomis twins. And Imogen starts to explain that, like, yeah, this is basically all because of me, like, and explains her dreams and her mother, basically that she's Ruidus born. And then Baron's like, oh, like, I wonder if Imogen is an exaltant, and explains how certain
Yeah.
Ruidus borns have these stronger connections and enhanced abilities because of it. And Imogen's like, yeah, did you guys know my mother? And they did, obviously, because of the study. So then Rin, lowers her wand and basically welcomes them properly. So then we get into basically just a bunch of questions, like everybody getting up to speed with each other. And in through this, we learn a lot. We basically find out that not Bell's Hells, the rest of these people, how they got into this. And Barron talks about how there were inconsistencies in the historical records that she was studying for Ruidus. And in the early days of the Grim Verity's research, even the high bearers of Vasselheim would just like push away and shoo away anyone who asked about such things. Um, there's a man named Arnold Trott, who is mentioned. That's one of their like Grim Verity allies, and they say that he was captured and taken in after the ancient texts were stolen. And they have another ally, Janina. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. Which a little bit more on her later, but she's also mentioned. So after the Grim Verity gets all this heat on them because of the stolen text and everything, they basically scattered, and Rin kind of offered them sanctuary. And she talks about her own history and how she got connected, how she's, this plane rider, studies the planes, and she got really interested in these Ruidus flares and the different bursts of energy that seemed to coincide with them. This led her into diving into Ruidus, which led her into finding the Omen Archive and thus the Grim Verity. Um, so she found these strange abnormalities in the realms closest to Exandria as well, the Shadowfell and the Feywild, and found strange devices in each of those realms being built to seemingly tap into this coming apex. So that's kind of what got her into all of this.
Right.
So then the group starts talking about the stolen texts, and Ebenold and Baron have both read them. And Imogen's like, do they mention a city on the moon? And they do not, but they're very interested in that. So Bell's Hells then fills them in on what they saw through the device and the telescope, how they saw the city and the god energy lattice. They then talk about the Nightmare King, Ira, and his kind of involvement in that device and the Cerberus Assembly. Ren is familiar with the Cerberus Assembly, of course, and she's heard of Ira by reputation, but doesn't know him personally. And then the group's like, okay, so what was in these texts? And the texts basically speak of two deities that have been forgotten by history but existed long ago. We've got Ethdoc, the Endless Shadow, and Vordo, the Fate Shaper. Ethdoc was the god of darkness and winter, and Vordo was the god of fate and order. The texts also prove that Ruidus didn't always exist, and it was in fact created by the gods. There was this era during the founding where the gods were afraid of something. Something had come from beyond the stars that the gods recognized when it arrived, and they called it Predathos. And Predathos resisted their miracles and hunted them, and is said to have spawned its own twisted life in its wake as it did so. Predathos devoured Ethdoc and then Vordo. So then the texts speak of this accord between the primordial titans and the gods to carve a prison from Exandria itself to seal away Predathos in and sent it into the darkness. But the prison clung to our world and hung in the sky as a new moon. So the theory that they have is that in attempting to erase this known history surrounding Ruidus and the moon and Predathos, that would be their best way of like dodging interest in it so that it would maybe never become a danger again. And it has worked for a long time, but clearly that's not working anymore. So they took this information to like the high bearers and the top clerics and priests, but it was like met with extreme prejudice and denial. And now those same people are trying to silence them. So they're like, yeah, so you are now in possession of knowledge that basically paints a large target on your back. So the group's like, okay. And then they get into being like, do you guys know about Odahan? And they're like, yeah, they think that she's probably an exaltant as well. She's been building an army all over Exandria of Ruidusborns, and they've all been coming to Marquette. Especially recently, they've all just been coming in droves, like they're drawn here for some reason. Um, and they assume that's where Imogen's mother probably is, like amongst these Ruidusborns that are being drawn here. And they talk about how her mother was like an incredible subject in their study. But then Odahan found her along with the Cerberus Assembly, and basically her Liliana's personal quest for like finding answers about like what's going on with her trumped her better judgment, and she went with them. Um, Orm's then like, so what are you guys even like? What's the Grim Verity trying to do here? And they're basically Ebenold and Baron are more scholarly, and they're just trying to find out more. But Rin, Plane Rider Rin, is a doer. She wants to do something about all of this. She knows people are trying to utilize this coming apex uh, for no good, basically, and she's going to do whatever she can to stop them from doing that. And Bell's Hells are like, boom, we're with you on that.
Yeah,
So,
let's do weird stuff.
yeah. So they then talk more about Rudisborns. Again, there's just a lot here. But Chetney asks if Ethodok and Vordo were prime deities or betrayer gods, and they tell him that this was before that distinction. So, but this was back when all the gods like worked together, at least in some capacity. So then Rin starts talking about these devices that she's seen in both the Feywild and the Shadowfell and the Prime Material Plane, actually, and basically that they maybe should look to kind of sabotage one of these as maybe a first plan of action. Um, and she says that she had been researching the ley lines and came to find out that the cycle of how they shipped over Exandria isn't random, but is just that, a cycle that they go through over long periods of time. And the nexus north of Eos, where this next one is, or one of the nexuses of this next apex rather, is going to be, she was going to study but came to find that the Cerberus assembly had essentially taken it over, this excavation site where this nexus is. They basically bullied their way in, and that's where this one of these devices is in fact at right now. So they're like, maybe we could get in and sabotage that, but where this device is being built at this nexus, it actually has ties to this Tishtan culture. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that right. Which was this like old society that basically just vanished off the face of the planet during the time of like the schism. Um, so they're like, okay, so what can we do about all this? We can't face an army of Rudisborns, but like maybe we can infiltrate like as different small seeded groups and distract rather than like face head on. So they're like, yeah, I mean, that's probably our best bet. So let's try to do something about these devices. And Rin again says, like, they aren't just telescopes. They have this like unique planar tether aspect to them. And like, they're definitely important to whatever's going on. So like, if we had someone on the inside, maybe they could help us out. Um, so, and this conversation leads to Fern being like, well, my grandma could probably help us out. She's in the Feywild and she's really strong. And um, Rin has heard of Mori, the Fate Stitcher, and is like, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's somebody that could probably help. But they're concerned about traveling to the Feywild and the weird time dilation stuff that happens there. And Morrigan, Fern's grandmother, as a archfey, could probably help them with that problem. So they're like, okay, well, let's ask. So Imogen gets some more information on Fern really quick before she then tries to send a message to Maury and is basically like, hey, I'm Fern's friend. She misses you. We need some help. Could you help us with the timey-wimey, wobble-wobble aspects of the Feywild? And Maury responds and is like so excited to hear about Fern. Is like, tell her to come visit and I can help always. So the group's then like, okay, well, what else do we need to accomplish like right now in EOS? And they're first and foremost like, oh yeah, Ashton. We gotta meet back up with Ashton. Um, and then they're like, well, what about the Judicators? Like, who sent those anyway? And they're told it was definitely Vasselheim, specifically the High Bearer of the Platinum Sanctuary. They've been chasing them ever since these texts were stolen to make sure the knowledge gained and the people who gained it are basically permanently forgotten. Um, Chetney's like, yeah, we saw the Judicators, and they probably know that we came to your house next, so you might want to be careful. And they're like, okay. Um, they're like, okay, well, how do we get back? And Plane Rider Ren's like, don't worry, I got you. Where do you want to go back to? And they ultimately land on just going back to the basement where they came from. And so she sends them back. They arrive, and basically immediately Chetney hears like the sound of splintering wood and can hear like steps above them from where they are in the basement. And he quickly like closes the false door and is like, hey, there's people here. They then hear a voice that says, you sure you heard them here? Smell them? Find them. And that's where the episode ends. Whew, long one.
And that was episode Axiom. shaken. That was our recap. And if you're watching just the recap video, click the link in the comments or in the description for our full breakdown and discussion. And we want to know what you thought of the episode and your thoughts and best guesses as to what is freaking going on